delighted to co-sponsor this event this month with Janssen Laboratories. They're the pharmaceutical arm of J&J, which is a healthcare giant. These facilities are Janssen Laboratories, and we have our meetings every month over here. So Diego, thank you so much for allowing us to use the facility. And this month, a special thanks to Janssen because they're also sponsoring this event. So normally we've become teetotalers recently, and we've been only serving water. But I noticed this month everyone's drunk. Diego's paying for the wine. And I think this is a great match between TiE and Janssen, because Janssen runs an incubator, and they really put their money where their mouth is. I'm one of the companies, and I know Mitch has another company in the incubator. It's been a fabulous space for us to work and get our work done and not have any distractions. Patrick is over here. There's several of us from the incubator companies. So, in their own way, a large company is supporting us entrepreneurs. So, again, thank you, Janssen. I'm going to make a couple of announcements, and I normally introduce all our charter members, and I'm going to just ask my charter members to forgive me, but I decided unilaterally that that was very boring, so I'm going to stop doing that. But we do appreciate our charter members. The charter members are the people who really fund our organization. I say this every month, I'm like a Robin Hood. I steal from these guys, and we are able to run events and do things that we believe in because of their money and their donations. TiE also, what we do other than monthly events like this, we also run entrepreneurship classes over a 6-month period for local high school students. Last year we had about 40 of them from 13 high schools, and this is regardless of their ability to pay. Every alternate Saturday for 3 hours, and we serve breakfast, and we believe we're the only organization in town that does that. So, quite honestly, we get a lot more from doing it than we put in, because just to see these high school students after 6 months present their business plans and the excitement, and sometimes we've got to drive the parents away because the parents say, we never had anything like this when we were young. So although we have 40 students, sometimes the room has got up 120, 130 people. So that's very gratifying. I also wanted to make a couple of announcements before I introduce the speakers today. TiECon, which is based in Los Angeles area, this is SoCalTiE.org is their website. They're having a meeting on November 8th, and I believe it's an all-day meeting. They have 4 or 5 different areas that they'll be covering. They talk about cloud computing, VC funding, Hollywood, Bollywood, and then I said Jollywood, or Jolly Good. That's not part of my script, I just made that up. So there'll be panels on each of these 4 or 5 areas with distinguished speakers. They'll also have 3 keynote speakers. I believe there's dinner and entertainment as well. So on behalf of our sister chapter, or brother chapter, whatever, in Los Angeles, I'd like to ask you to take a look at that, and if you can go, that would be a very exciting day's event. And to today's event. Today's event poses the question, can entrepreneurs heal healthcare with technology? And what we've been trying to do is we've been trying to look at areas where there's been a lot of growth, there's been a lot of activity, and then we bring panels to discuss these areas with our members each month. What's the technology, how's the technology being used, what are the opportunities for entrepreneurs. So I'm Rick Valencia, who's the GM of Qualcomm Life, is going to moderate the session. So Rick, we're delighted to have you over here. Just speak to Rick. He has a fascinating background. He's been an entrepreneur and Now he's working in a large company as an entrepreneur, which is the new thing that's happening. And Rick will introduce our panel, so I'm going to hand it over to Rick. Is your mic working over there?
Yeah,
Computer.
So, I don't know if you guys have been noticing this, but I'm really impressed. These two are up here studying notes and reading their own book, just making sure they're ready for this. I saw them drinking though earlier, so that might have something to do with it. So thank you all very much for having me. I actually got a call from Lisa asking if I would help out, and without hesitation, I accepted, because any chance I get to heckle Lisa is a good day. She and I, actually, I've known her for quite some time. She's an advisor to Qualcomm Life. She's on our advisory council. And David I've never met in person until tonight, but he and I, through the power of social networking, have known each other for a year or so, because we heckle each other over Twitter for the most part.
That's how we met too.
Very romantic, you two. So anyway, who wants to go first, by the way? Who's going to get up and talk first? So David is going to get up and talk first, David Shaywitz. And I would be interested in asking you a question. Are you going to get up over here, or are you going to sit here? And... Yeah, I think you should. Okay. So you probably already got your planned script, and I'm going to throw you off a little bit right off the bat, because I asked you earlier to tell us a little bit about your background and what led you here. And it would be nice, because what happened was that in outside and then having dinner, I talked with 4 or 5 people about their backgrounds and shared my background, and all of us came from different places to get to where we are today in digital health. So I think it'd be really interesting if they heard from both of you on that topic. So David, you want to start off? Sure. And you can also give whatever other few words you were planning on giving before I interrupted that.
I think Lisa's path is probably certainly more interesting. I was headed towards academic medicine, did internal medicine, endocrine stem cell biology. Decided I really liked the idea of being able to not just learn stuff, but really try to apply it practically. Took a twist towards industry and consulting. And then when I came out here, it was a real opportunity to follow up on this lifelong passion for technology and being able to try to integrate the sort of incredible emerging, but a little bit almost overexcitable hype around Silicon Valley, and to try to see how one could take that and apply it to some of the challenges that I saw firsthand as a physician, researcher, and drug developer, which is what I do for my day job.
This is better.
So, do you want me to use that instead?
Or lean in maybe a little bit more up there.
Is that a little bit better? Okay. So, to contextualize this a bit, so I'm just going to read a little bit from one of the first posts that I wrote about medicine in Silicon Valley. It's called "What Silicon Valley Doesn't Understand About Medicine." So where's Silicon Valley when we leave? The inexorable rise of healthcare costs has created not only a crisis waiting to happen, but also an urgent need for innovation. Exactly the sort of thing for which Silicon Valley is justly famous. So where is it? Well, entrepreneurs in the Valley and elsewhere have achieved remarkable success, at least historically, developing new drugs and devices. More fundamental innovation in healthcare delivery, particularly the sort designed to take costs out of the system, has proved far more elusive. And it's not for lack of trying. Almost every legendary Silicon Valley entrepreneur, I guess Lisa now runs into them wearing hoodies. Who did you see at...
Oh, John Scully.
Yes, now John Scully is walking around wearing a gray hoodie.
Really?
For real.
Yeah, she sent me a picture, I wouldn't have believed it. Has recognized the opportunity. Our healthcare system is legendary for its inefficiencies, complexity, and opacity. All areas that seem utterly amenable to a technology-driven solution. Yet, to date, the results have been middling at best. Why hasn't there been a Google or a Facebook in the healthcare space? One reason may be that existing stakeholders are more entrenched than generally appreciated. We may be also more reluctant to tinker with our health than we are to try out the latest app. And it's also likely that until recently, entrepreneurs were more incentivized to create more expensive solutions than to engineer cost-effective ones. Yet I'd argue that the most significant disconnect I found here in Silicon Valley is a failure to understand the nature of the problem to be solved. Most engineers and computer scientists with whom I've spoken conceptualize medicine as primarily a rational, evidence-based, problem-solving enterprise focused on well-defined conditions, rather than a discipline that, in my experience, owes more to scientism than science, is far more ambiguous than most engineers tend to recognize, and is founded on relationships, connectedness, trusted advice, reassurance, and frequently the offloading of significant responsibilities from patient to doctor. Perhaps the physician's greatest responsibility is helping to compassionately mediate the patient's experience of illness. Simply put, and I'll end with this paragraph, medicine is so much more than simply a diagnosis and treatment. Although regrettably, in today's world of rapid-fire outpatient medicine, it occasionally seems to be reduced to this cartoon. And patients, and especially those with chronic illnesses, value more than just the rigid outcome measures traditional metrics tend to capture. A novel technology platform that overlooks the integrated needs of patients, or underestimates, or fails to account for the complexity and messiness of illness as it actually occurs and is experienced by patients and those closest to them, will inevitably fall short.
Lisa Suennen.
Hello, everyone. Ooh, can't put those on yet. Thank you so much for coming. It's really nice to see such a large turnout in the audience and so many great people here. Thanks to Jansen and to TiE for making this happen. Really appreciate it. I came to healthcare via my incredibly valuable graduate degree in political science, where I studied voting behavior. And, you know, ironically, it actually turned out to be sort of valuable, not because I have any particular skills, because I really don't, but because it taught me to think about why people do things the way they do. And I think that's such a big theme in healthcare. You know, think about the psychology of healthcare, how payers act, how providers act, and most importantly, how patients act. And it's really colored my experiences, which started off in software, not healthcare. And I just, through one of those lucky coincidences, joined a startup of a healthcare company back in the 80s and got to ride that up from a raw startup to an $800 million a year company. And it was fascinating. I left from there to start a venture fund. So I spent the last 15 years working with entrepreneurs and investing in companies and sort of watching the changes that are going on, and particularly lately with after health reform and the advent of sort of new technologies over the last 5 years. It's been very interesting to see this industry changing in ways it really hasn't ever, probably since, you know, Hippocrates. So I'm going to read, I decided, instead of taking a technology approach to this, I was going to read a more consumer-oriented piece called A Tale of Two Doctor Visits, which is about my week I had some time ago visiting two different types of doctors for two different reasons. And I think I like to think about this piece because I think it really gives color to the challenge we have today as people are shifting, consumers are shifting to be the more locus and focus of the healthcare system, whether they want to be or not, or being, you know, held responsible to be more accountable, and also being responsible to be more financially accountable so they can make more decisions. And it's called A Tale of Two Doctor Visits. It starts with the classic starred Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. We all talk about how wonderful patient engagement in the healthcare system is, but in today's flawed healthcare system, there's almost nothing worse than to be a healthcare savvy person using it. We know too much. We know what injustices to look out for and what can go wrong. We know when we're being overtreated and poorly treated, and we know the doctors generally wish we'd shut up and stop asking questions. In the past month, I'd had occasion to visit a doctor twice. In the first instance, I had a pain in my mouth that made me understand where the expression, "I thought my head would explode," came from. It was mind-numbing, blackout-inducing pain, the likes of which I haven't felt since childbirth. I had to invent whole new swear words to even describe it. It turns out I needed an emergency root canal due to a broken tooth. The other recent encounter I had with the medical system, I voluntarily paid a visit to a cosmetic surgeon to inquire how much money and what kind of promises I'd have to make to God to look 25 again. Turns out there's no promise big enough to make good on that bill. God already has everything, and the devil is on vacation, even if I could afford to pay the bill. Nevertheless, the experience of those 2 doctor visits were so widely different from each other that it felt they warranted writing about. A few weeks back, I wrote a post called "Give Them That Old Razzle Dazzle." That piece was about products and spas that are couched as consumer products and paid for very willingly by consumers, and some where medication is not. I touched on the kind of marketing and customer service that spas use to separate people willingly from their money. I contrasted this to how reluctant those same consumers are to part with their cash, even for life-saving products and services, when the services fall under the "this should be covered by insurance" umbrella. This post offers another flavor of that same dish, but in this case one that reflects on provider behavior when faced with an insured patient versus one who would be footing the bill personally, were either the God or the devil in a negotiating mood. One would like to think that the source of payment wouldn't matter and every patient would be treated like a valued customer, but my own personal experience belies the truth. When you're viewed as the insured member, you are in coach. When you're viewed as the customer, you are in first class. It's a bit like the difference between staying at Motel 6 and the Four Seasons. At Motel 6, you're lucky to get a bar of soap and a towel big enough to dry your hands. At the Four Seasons, they put flowers in your room, use your actual name when talking to you, and let you know that someone can be sent personally to tell you off if you just call the concierge. The difference becomes meaningful as we've started to make the slow march towards a healthcare system where patients are being moved into the position employers and the government have long occupied, the one between the wallet and the doctor. So, first story, the toothache. I'm one of those lucky people who grew up with fluoridated water and thus have had only one cavity in my whole life. I'm not one of those people who's afraid of dentists because, for the most part, nothing bad has ever happened to me there. So when I showed up and announced on a Monday morning after a night of hell, I was very appreciative the dentist agreed to see me right away. He took one, looked at me, asked me 3 questions, looked in my mouth for less than 10 seconds, and declared, "You need a root canal on tooth number 31. I said, "How do you know?" He said, "I've been doing this for 35 years. I know." He followed that with, "But I need to do an x-ray to verify it." Fine, I said, "Better for me if we know he's right. I wouldn't want it as a unnecessary procedure. This is what I'm thinking as they light me up." While we're waiting for the x-ray to process, he calls his pal, the local endodontist, and arranges for me to go right over there to get the root canal, which I do appreciate. And then his assistant hands me the x-ray, which has not been looked at by the dentist, and she tells me to bring it to the endodontist. I say, "Aren't you going to look at it to be sure your diagnosis is right?" The dentist says, "I know." So I'm thinking, why the heck do we do this x-ray if I didn't need it because he knew? My immediate cynical thought was that he did it because he gets paid to do it, assumes my insurance will cover it, and that's that. I try to check my cynicism at the door since I appreciated seeing me so quickly. I remind myself the endodontist will need to know where to do his thing, so the x-ray is probably necessary after all. Fast forward half an hour, I'm now filling out by hand form after form of repetitive information at the endodontist's office. I literally write my name and address on 4 different forms. Same goes for my medical info. Clearly the whole EMR tsunami has not made it to these shores. I point out that they have asked me to sign a form agreeing to whatever procedure they're going to do when they have not yet told me what they are going to do. One of the guys hanging out in the lobby in scrubs says, "Yeah, good point, just sign it and we'll work it out." I refuse to sign it until I know what's happening. He shrugs. By the way, I later find out this guy is the endodontist, because later when I lay in the chair, he's the one with the tools. At that point I say, "Oh, so you're the doctor?" He confirms. Meanwhile, back in the waiting room, I ask what this whole fun fest is going to cost, and what will be covered by my insurance and what will not. They give me a rundown, but not a guarantee of costs. In fact, I'll find out later when the bill comes, I owe twice as much as I was told it was likely to cost. I'm not impressed. After a brief wait, I have to say they were fast to see me and didn't make me sit around. I hand the doctor the x-ray, still virginal in his jacket, having been unreviewed by anyone. The doctor says thanks, put it aside, and says he'll be doing new x-rays. I say, "What the hell? What's wrong with the x-ray you just dropped in the garbage?" He says, "Oh no, mine is a digital x-ray, and we have to do it here because we use it to guide treatment. I have a small fit." What was the point of the first x-ray, then I asked? Why are you guys double treating me? I don't want the extra radiation in my head. For one thing, I can kill my brain cells all on my own, thank you. Now my cynicism comes roaring back. I tell the doctor that I think he's suggesting an unnecessary procedure. He, smiling, says to me, "I won't treat you without the x-rays." He knows I can't continue in pain like this, and in fact I have a flight to the East Coast scheduled to depart in 6 hours. "It's your choice," says the doctor. Checkmate. I'm furious, but despite what he said, I feel I have no choice. I feel very annoyed, and they haven't even started drilling yet. The drilling did, in fact, amplify my annoyance. I am told, after it's all over, 5 more x-rays later, that I'm done, and that is that. I'm given no information on how to care for myself, except keep it clean and don't bite on that side. And I'm told I will need to go back to the regular dentist for a crown within no more than 3 weeks. An appointment is set for 4 weeks later, because I'm told that is the first available time. On top of that, the dental assistant calls me to reschedule the appointment no less than 3 separate times, further pushing out the timeline. I say I thought I needed to be seen within 3 weeks. They tell me not to worry. I am worried. The age defier. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, I've decided I'm curious about all these minimally invasive plastic surgery procedures that all my VC friends are funding and making me funding from. Of course, when I ask them about this stuff, they tell me it's great, it works, but I decide I want to find out for myself. I ask around, and through my research, come across a guy in San Francisco who's supposed to be good and honest and highly experienced, and also a doctor. While I'm suspicious that this combination can occur in nature, I call to set up a consultation. I brace myself for the pain of visiting a new doctor. My suspicions are amplified when they actually try to set an appointment around my actual schedule, not caring that I'm suggesting evenings and weekends and other strange times when physicians rarely work. They tell me this is no problem, they'll make it work at my convenience, but they actually do. They send me both an email and text confirmation of the time selected. They send me an email link to their EMR so I can input all of my information once online. When I show up for my appointment, the assistant introduces herself, shakes my hand, and thanks me for coming. I'm offered a cold beverage and a nice cushy seat, in which I wait about 1 minute before being shown to the back. Again, wait for less than a minute before the doctor comes in, shakes my hand, introduces himself. He tells me about his background and qualifications. He asks me why I'm there. I give him my story, then he offers to explain in great detail the technology and clinical information relevant to all of the products about which I inquire. He is patient and detailed and says, I love it when people ask lots of questions. It means they care about their health. He goes and gets props and photos to explain. He actively describes how he minimizes unnecessary procedures and visits. When we're through, his assistant, who is of course beautiful and has a soothing accent, goes through costs and risks and process and everything you can imagine in great detail. The pricing document has a guarantee about virtually all costs. You cannot be surprised. There's an extensive package of take-home education information. After the appointment, I receive a thank you email. Seriously, it's like I went to a wedding shower, not a doctor's appointment. I email back one lingering question I had and receive a response within the hour. I've not decided whether I'm going to do anything service-wise yet, but I want to go back to the office just because it was so pleasant to be there. And to quote Dickens again, we had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. I conclude with, I found the contrast between these two experiences very interesting in light of the thinking I've been doing about what happens in a reformed U.S. healthcare system, where people directly choose their insurance products through health insurance exchanges. These decisions would be based largely on benefits offered and cost. But if history is any judge, they will also be based in large part on the doctor network that will be assigned to the patient. In this brand new world, consumers will be able to fire their health plan and switch doctors when they are unsatisfied with the services received. This is in stark contrast to how things work today. It's nearly impossible to switch health plans unless your employer does it for you, and changing doctors is a hassle extraordinary. In a world where data is portable and consumers can vote with their feet and their wallets, customer service is really going to matter in a way it does not today. I've seen a proliferation of programs for doctors to teach them more about technology and finance for the new world healthcare system, but I've seen little to suggest they're being trained to live in a Nordstrom-style world. This is probably a great opportunity for healthcare consultants that used to teach doctors how to code, or as we also call it, overbill. Perhaps we will see medical schools open up their curriculum to include a little foray into hospitality services and how to remember the customer's always right, even when they are a pain in the neck. That plus a little charm school would go a long way towards ensuring brand loyalty that providers will need to prosper in a more complex world where the financial transaction has been simplified from a three-way provider-payer-patient transaction to a two-party relationship between provider and patient. And in case you're wondering, all those extra x-rays have given me a special iridescent glow, my previously absent superpowers.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, kidding aside, I'm really honored to be here with the two of you, strategist, consultant, Both of them deeply engaged in healthcare for quite some time, but in this digital transformation that we're going through. Both of them authors, by the way, reading from their own book, and Lisa blogs at venturevalkyrie.com.
Yeah.
And David writes for Fords as well, so you can find them both online, regularly writing on the topic, although you're not doing quite as much on digital health these days, are you? Not as much, yeah. So one of the reasons that I wanted you to share a bit about your background, I mean, I come from a technology background. I had no healthcare experience whatsoever when I started working at Qualcomm, and shortly thereafter helped to build the wireless health business there. But we also talked to Mitch in the back of the room here, who he started off his career playing the French horn in the symphony in Germany, if I understood that right. So we've all come from very different paths to get to where we are. And I think in any early stage industry, in transformations that you see that healthcare is going through right now, having different perspectives is critically important. And I know we have a lot of entrepreneurs here in the room, and I'm sure a lot of you come from varied backgrounds, but let's start off kind of with the end question, and then maybe I'll come back to that too, but it's really pertinent, I think, to entrepreneurs who are trying to figure out where to focus and where the opportunity is. But let me ask a really, really big question. Can passionate entrepreneurs heal healthcare with technology?
Maybe. Sort of.
Can they? Do we have a chance?
Who else is going to do it?
There you go.
Well, I think it depends on which question you're asking. Is it about entrepreneurs or just about technology? I think one of the things I find fascinating about what's going on in healthcare right now is there's this sort of weird tension or competition between the technology people coming to healthcare for the first time and saying, you healthcare people are idiots, look how much you screwed it up, we're going to fix it with technology, get out of our way. And then there's all the old school healthcare people who say, you technology people are idiots, all you know about is technology, you don't understand how the healthcare system really works. And I think the truth of the matter is you need entrepreneurs from both worlds to work together to make this work. You need fresh ideas from the outside, and you need knowledge of the way finances and process flows work in healthcare for entrepreneurs to succeed. Whether it's with technology is another question. I think that's definitely an important tool that can help address particularly the cost and quality issues that have been so problematic. But I think alone, technology is not the answer. That story I picked for that very reason. I think it's about human interaction as well as technology.
Yeah, I think that some of the problems even relate to the inflow of money, where so much of the funding is coming from, are just these technologists who've been successful with Facebook, particularly, or other places, and they almost more money than they know what to do with. And they're sort of funding. So even when they're turning to healthcare, it's really, well, we're engineers, we've solved our problem in this area A, and we'd like to put the money to work in area, in something related to healthcare. Whereas some of the healthcare folks may even have good ideas, but at least until the last 9 months, really, it was a drought. It was a really tough time for life science, particular entrepreneurs and for VCs. Not that you should feel sorry for them. So I think that the sort of, and then there's also a really difference in terms of age. In a lot of these technology entrepreneurs, if you're, it almost feels like if you're over 25, people write about it. Well, people are going for those, seeing those plastic surgeons you're writing about. Whereas, to get any experience on the life science or the healthcare side, I think age is looked upon a little bit more positively.
So I want to push a little bit on the doctor-patient relationship and the engagement issue, because that's used a lot, I think, to sort of put the innovators back on their heels a little bit, back in their place. Because how can you argue that, right? You have a really sick person. They need the care of a doctor, someone who's trained to give that type of care and have the empathy. But for the most part, for a healthy person, if I can use technology to stay healthier, if I can use technology to stay out of the doctor's office, the best doctor-patient relationship I'll ever have is not having one at all, because I don't need to see a doctor. But think of a mother. One of the great stories I love to tell is about Cell-Scope. So a mother with a screaming child who she knows her daughter has an earache, and if she could just take the picture and send it directly to the doctor instead of having to go through the whole routine of scheduling the appointment and getting there 3 days later and then getting the prescription and then getting into the pharmacy, go directly to the pharmacy. And that for a lot of care, that's technology at its best, really solving problems. So I'm going to ask you both.
So I think that what you're describing is really a principle that Clay Christensen talked about in the Innovator's Prescription, where the idea is that a lot of the care that's being delivered doesn't need to be delivered by people who've spent 20 years in medical school, and training and all of those advanced degrees. And the real issue is that how can you in a way de-average all of that so that the people can sort of get the level and pay for or incur the cost at sort of the level that's appropriate, but not have to do more. So for example, that's why there are all these mini clinics. There's this whole disruptive idea of being able to have people, instead of seeing doctors, being able to see people who can be lower cost, in a way more efficient providers, and technology can play a role in that. Now there was a thing in Harvard Business Review in the last 3 months by the same people who wrote the Innovator's Prescription asking why hasn't it worked? What has been the problem? And it's not that it hasn't worked, but getting these, they were expecting there to be these drugstore clinics everywhere. Walgreens is a big play in that CVS. A lot of these people are still doing that. But it's still a struggle to find the traction they were expecting. And a lot of times the theory behind it was that you want everyone to practice at what's called the top of their license. You want the doctors who've done all the surgery not to do with throat cultures. But it turns out it's a high margin business for a lot of doctors, and according to this blog post anyway, and they say that they don't want to give it up. There's sort of these regulators where there's a lot of regulation that protects, and there's just a lot of regulation that protects incumbents. I think that one other part just of your question I wanted to get to was you're saying the role of technology when the patient comes into the office. I think when people have started to sort of look at the quality of the care that's provided, we have this really feel-good feeling about, oh, the doctor and the empathy, and that's incredibly, as I was writing about, a really important part of the experience. But at some level, you also want the doctor to be doing the right thing, and not just to be sort of an avuncular fellow who's not really providing the best medicine. And I think actually Coach was making wonderful points along this line, where he says if you were able to provide, to collect the information better and still preserve the critical patient-physician or whatever it is, interaction, but have it be so much more informed, be able to make sure that the doctor has the most up-to-date information, is assigning the chemo because it wasn't the latest drug rep who happened to come in, but it was really what the latest evidence suggests is the best. You could really continue to maintain the empathy, but actually improve the quality of care that's delivered.
Real quickly before you jump in, Lisa, you mentioned something about doctors' motivations, and sometimes it's financial incentive, not entirely, I'm sure, but obviously that has an impact. And I read, and it might have even been in one of your stories, that every dollar of waste in the system is someone else's dollar of profit.
That's right. I mean, I think the issue isn't that technology can't solve a lot of these problems, particularly relatively simple ones like that. I mean, I think unless you've got an incredibly good-looking doctor, you're not thinking about going to the doctor, so that's a good thing to do. I think the question is one of trust. And what I don't think the technology guys have done well yet, and some have done better than others, is create trust. Because you see all these companies with all these products, particularly these self-screening, self-diagnosis products and the like, for the home, and a lot of them really haven't been tested in a way that shows that they're reliable. And so the patient still looks to the doctor for approval or prescription or what you will, or validation. And that's probably the middle ground, is that you find a way to create trust through the doctor to the technology, at least for now. So even with technologies that have been proven to be accurate or relatively safe and all those other things, and most, especially when we talk about kids, people are very afraid to play roulette with their kids' health. If you don't have a sense of a doctor sort of blessing it, even if you're doing it remotely, I think people are still reluctant to believe. Mm-hmm. But that's probably an evolutionary thing to a certain extent.
And I think it may also relate to the concept that Sandy Pentland talks about in his book, New Bright Social Physics, where he talks about how information spreads through networks. And he was the guy who sort of figured out the Department of Defense had some contest. They were going to launch 10 red balloons in the United States. And then whoever was the first to identify the location of all of those balloons was going to get some award. I don't know if you remember that, right?
Yeah, I do.
And so he sort of basically, through kind of leveraging connections and sort of figuring out how to solve that right, was able to sort of, I mean, it's one of many things that he sort of was able to do to demonstrate by getting the incentives right and leveraging the power of these large networks, was able to sort of do it. But one of the things that he sort of really, with almost an unexpected finding of his book, is that on the one hand, yeah, you can use things like Twitter, like you can use all these things to get information out really, really fast. But in terms of, and those are, you know, like quick things, but in terms of changing behavior, it's not from Twitter, and it's not from these one-offs. It's from, you're most likely to change behavior based on on one-to-one relationships from the people who are closest to you. So when they're trying to demonstrate change behavior, it's not, oh, send somebody a tweet or a text message, as important as those could be in the right context, but rather trying to have the people who are the closest to you, your colleagues at work, your colleagues at your family, the people who are sort of your in the networks, to impact them, to impact you, with the idea that that's kind of the most important way to leverage change.
That behavior change thing is a big deal to what you're talking about, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, people who know they're probably gonna die if they don't take their medicines, don't fill their prescriptions and take their medicines. You know, it's unbelievable that, you know, what people will do, and yet we all do those kinds of things. Maybe not on that extreme, but you know, to get people to take care of themselves and not put off medical care that they need is a function both of finance and also motivation. And the motivation issue, I think, is one of the big challenges to adoption of technology for self-care and some of those things, because by and large, people don't take care of themselves even when it's free, even when it's available, even when they trust the doctor and all the rest of that stuff. So it's another complicating factor.
Yeah. So how about that whole issue of behavior change? And it's on both sides, by the way. It's not just on the patient side, it's on the physician side of things. So, you know, I'm a bit biased on the mobile side of things, but one of the things that's going on right now that's really fascinating is the mobilization, if you will, of virtually every industry and things in industries that you just wouldn't have thought of before. I think one of the ones people like to use a lot is Uber, because of that complete closed loop experience, and also because every time you say Uber, everyone smiles, because everyone loves Uber. But Nest is another really good example where you've used mobile technology, you've created a remote control and a user interface to something that was before a fairly inanimate object that sat somewhere that you had to walk up to and turn the dials. Now anything that has an up, down, on and off control, it took so much darn time to get up. Well, it's like the remote control for the TV. Who would ever want to go back and have to actually get up and turn the TV, the channel on the TV? But actually I saw one recently called One Dot. One Dot, yeah. Has anyone seen One Dot yet? This is really cool. So there's been a lot of financial services startups out there, and One Dot is one of the newer ones. And what they've done, same concept, they've created a user interface and a remote control for your credit cards. And so what happens is that you can control every aspect of your credit card real time, turn it on and off. So if you lose it, instead of calling, because you think you might find it, you can just turn it off for a while. You can put limits on the card for use and give it to someone else and assign them the rights, but it's all remote. It's all, you know, using the mobile technology and the ability to control something that you didn't have those controls of before. So now I'm using something fairly using some fairly specific examples, and I don't necessarily mean what are the analogs in healthcare, but what those types of solutions have done so far. Uber is, I think, a really good example. Is the experience is so compelling that I don't know that it took a bunch of people confirming that this was a great idea. You do it once, and it's like, I'm going to do that again. So give me some ideas about, especially for this crowd, because they're the innovation community here. They're entrepreneurs, and this is a big area where
I agree.
a lot of focus needs to be.
Well, I think what's really interesting about these examples is how they're effectively are convenience oriented, right? They make it easy, and you don't have to do much. And I think a couple good examples, and interesting examples to me in digital health, and particularly one that I'm really fascinated to see evolve, because it's very early, I think I'm not very far yet, but it's this development of sensors that go on the skin that not only measure whether you took the drug that you're supposed to take, but whether you have the therapeutic dose in your system that you're supposed to have. And that can send you, or the doctor, or whomever, information telling you, or whoever, the drug was taken and the drug was taken in the right dose, and you don't have to do anything except, of course, to take the drug. And I think that's very interesting because it's sort of passive monitoring. It provides important information, and provides for a closed loop thing. And I think the other one that I've seen that I kind of like is this one called Propeller Health, which is a little device that goes on in a rescue inhaler, like a B-roll inhaler for asthma patients. And it's stuck on the top of the inhaler at the pharmacy, so when the patient is using their rescue inhaler too much, it passively sends information to whomever is receiving the information, the caregiver, doctor, whatever, that says this patient is probably going to get into trouble real soon with their asthma. And the patient's just doing what they would have done anyway, which is use the inhaler when they need it. But they don't have to write anything down. They don't have to open an app. They don't have to do anything. They just do their normal thing, and the information becomes usable and actionable. And I think that type of stuff is where we're
Powered by QNet, by the way.
powered by TuneIn.
I think that Propeller Health, so I wrote up, discussed sort of in detail some recent publication or conference presentation from Propeller Health maybe a month ago. And so I think that they're kind of right at the, I think they highlight the tension between the opportunity of these sort of mobile technologies for all the reasons you say, and the challenge of demonstrating value, where they're, they presented data of the system exactly the way Lisa described it, and they concluded that there was an experiment that was done through Dignity Health, and they said, well, we save all of this money, but when you look in the data, it turns out that the asthma scores of the patients who they were treating weren't statistically different. So they didn't actually improve in this early study, it's not completed, but at an early point, the actual asthma scores, the clinical measure, the best measure that they had of the clinical outcome, wasn't improved at all. So it's...
The number of hospital days was reduced.
Right, but and again, part of the challenge, of the days that were, it gets a little detailed, but part of the reason some of the days were reduced is they start off with patients who all were hospitalized, had some hospital-related event for asthma the year before. So statistically, most of those, even if you don't do anything, aren't going to have an event the next year. So intrinsically, all of their costs are going to go down. Now, there were a difference between the control groups and the treated groups, and now and the doctor who actually administered it. It was wonderful from a population health perspective because he could look at his panel of 100 asthma patients and figure out who's been using their inhaler a lot, and potentially there really could have been a cost savings from being able to head off exacerbating, just not preventing them, but just like we're talking about, being able to at least treat them before the person actually comes in for care. I mean, I think the opportunity, again, one of the things you were asking about for digital health is right now, if you think about even now for medicine, people come, medicine is so localized in time and space. People come into the doctor, let's say once a year, to the hospital, to the clinic, and that's not how we experience life, that's not how we experience health. And I think mobile in particular, and the sensors that Lisa was talking about, really have an opportunity to have the way health is captured more fully reflect human experience. Now the challenge is doing it in a way that no one wants to actually be monitored 24/7, or more so than we are. And so the dilemma is, how do you get useful information, and how do you leverage the data, which is some of the stuff that Ginger.io sort of, or Moves maybe now, that's what recently bought by Facebook is trying to do. Capture some of the data in your smartphones, maybe the way you interact with people. They're trying to use it to predict the onset of depression. They're trying to use it to predict flares of some GI disease.
People are getting depressed when people don't click like on their Facebook.
And you know, and one other I can't resist. I don't feel like the drug guy is going to go after regulators, but it's true. The part about Uber that I especially like was, so you know, the earlier folks who were behind it, you know, what they're incredibly frustrated about is the concept of regulatory capture. That essentially incumbents are an incredible advantage because so much of the existing regulations favor them and make it really hard for, I mean, even I did take Uber from the airport today, and the guy instructed me how to lie to security so that they wouldn't get a ticket from the airport folks, because they're not allowed, because you know, there's a huge amount of controversy between Uber and the existing taxi cab drivers, and they're giving all these people in Uber tickets because there's things going around regulators.
You bet.
Figuring out how to navigate that's a challenge.
So we're talking about behavior change as it relates to how we receive care and how care is delivered, but there's also a need to, if we're really going to bend the cost curve here, for patients to take more responsibility of their own health and their own wellness, and they're obviously taking more financial responsibility for their health right now. So that also requires some pretty dramatic behavior change, both from the patient's standpoint of engaging in that, and also from the doctor's standpoint of accepting a partner in managing my care. Because generally speaking, that's not how it works. You go to the doctor and they tell you what to do, and you just go do it. So what are your thoughts around that sort of behavior change?
Behavior change is the holy grail in medicine and in many other things. You know, we all know that the vast majority of chronic illnesses are totally avoidable if you just ate better, exercised, and took care of yourself, which accounts for the vast majority of cost in the healthcare system.
It's your Esther Dyson moment.
Esther Dyson moment, right? So, you know, if you could take everybody who's born now and educate them at school, you know, let's start with education, you know, how to live healthier lives, you know, don't cut, you know, healthy foods and exercise and gym programs out of schools when the budgets get cut, you know, cut something else like Latin or whatever. You know, and teach people and reinforce that and coordinate policy. So on the one hand, you don't have, you know, Mrs. Obama pushing the Let's Move campaign, and the next day a farm bill is signed subsidizing high fructose corn syrup. You know, it's a really complicated issue. But when you get down to the individual level, you know, the only thing that seems to be working at the moment that maybe we can come up with is incentives, and mostly financial incentives, paying people to take care of themselves better. And it's a particularly poignant way to do it these days because the cost of healthcare is so high, and most people are now paying about 30 to 40% of the out-of-pocket of the costs of their insurance and associated costs, which in a family of 4 amounts to $6,000 to $7,000 a year out of pocket, a number that used to be, you know, a quarter of that not that many years ago. So, and if you look at like the growth in real wages, they're, you know, a third or a fifth of the growth in the healthcare costs that are being borne by people. So it's eating more and more of people's out-of-pocket or take-home pay. So I think, you know, people being incentivized with money seems to be very motivating, at least for a period of time, to get people to take their pills, to, you know, engage with whatever their diabetes regimen is, whatever. But I don't know that it's a long-term strategy. First of all, you run out of money eventually if you have to pay for somebody to take every single pill they take for the rest of their lives. Secondly, it loses its power over time. And so I think, you know, I really do think there's a huge component of this that is education-based and changing people early in life. I'm not sure you can get a room full of people, you know, who are our age to fundamentally change unless they have a life-changing experience. It's very difficult.
To ask, in this connection, behavior change, are there enough good outcome instances where technology, I'm coming from the technology side and devices, are there enough instances that could be publicized that people understand? For example, I heard somebody being monitored and a heart attack prevented because they were directed to the clinic in time. Mm-hmm. Are there enough cases? Are the devices sufficiently good enough? Are the rules-based things behind the devices good enough that we can cite that and publicize it?
I think predictive analytics have a long way to go, and the problem with some of them, there are things that you know that if certain things pile up in your data, bad things are going to happen, right? Your cholesterol shoots up, your blood pressure shoots up, your glucose is out of control. You are going to eventually have a heart attack or stroke from one of those things probably. The problem is it's probably not today, so I still go to Dairy Queen. It might be, and tomorrow it's probably still not today, so I'll just have that donut, so it's kind of, it's really tough. I mean, it's not impossible. People do make changes, obviously, but I think it's very, very challenging. There's this great book by Dan Ariely called Predictably Irrational, and it talks about exactly that, how irrational people are and how that's predictable, and how you can use those sort of weird patterns that people get themselves into to incentivize behavior change, and how that is something entrepreneurs should learn about to build these programs that incentivize and drive changes in consumer behavior. But you have to be very motivated, I think, to make real fundamental and long-lasting change.
And people try to do that through the other sort of behavior economics thing is sort of through principles of nudge. Like at Google, if you're fortunate enough to work there, they try to put the healthy food in the front because you're more likely to gorge on the healthy or whatever you see first versus versus things that are in the back. And there's the Cass Sunstein book on that. But a specific example of a digital health company that I think is maybe onto something that I'm certainly following with interest. And they just had another relative recent raise is Omada Health, right? Yeah. So what Omada Health does is they are building off of essentially an unexpected NIH study where so people, the development of diabetes occurs progressively, and the people who get diabetes are sort of at high risk to get diabetes. So if you could prevent them, even for a year, from getting them, you could do the patients a lot of good, and you could save a lot of cost at the system. Essentially, there's a step change in cost from an $800 a patient who's non-diabetic to all of a sudden you have to do all these additional things when they become diabetic. So it's more than just the disease itself is continuous, but your cost is more of a step change. And there was an NIH study where they were trying to basically figure out which of two different drugs was going to help prevent pre-diabetics from becoming diabetic. So they looked at metformin, they looked at TZD, it's a category of drugs which they eventually removed from the study. And then kind of like for giggles, they sort of said, oh yeah, let's throw in behavior change. Because you always sort of half-ass recommend to patients, yeah, do behavior change. But like hoping it works, but not necessarily expecting it to do. But as executed through the MDH Diabetes Center, David Nathan's group, they did it they did all the parts. So people got the drugs, but they did the behavior change in a really serious way. They had these sort of study nurses who were just on these people's, and I knew that when I trained with them, were on these people's cases, and they would call them, and they would hassle them, and it was really full court press to try to get these people to do things. And the result was that the drugs worked okay, the metformin worked, metformin works, but actually the behavior interventions blew everybody away, worked better, prevented or forestalled the development of diabetes. So the good news is that here was an actual, randomized controlled study, government done, the whole thing, like in a government funded, terrific study. But then the question is, okay, well, how can you do it at scale? So first, in Iowa, they tried to do it sort of through a YMCA, where they tried to, instead of, the problem is these nurses who they were doing it are incredibly expensive, and it was incredibly time intensive. So to make a long story short, first they tried to do it, people try to adapt it through local groups, let's say through local YMCAs, and they were starting to get some efficacy. And now what the group in Omada Health, with sort of some design influence from IDEO, are trying to do is do the same principles, but to do it through leveraging technology, but it's not driven by technology, is how I would describe it. They send people to scale, they connect people into different groups, they give coaching, and they're motivated because they're like, hey, if you don't do something about it, you're going to have diabetes, and they have to, maybe, and you don't want to have diabetes, so this is sort of a moment to catch people. So they have the motivation that you were talking about. It's buttressed by legitimate science, and they have a reason to think it would work. And so the question is, can you take this underlying science and then deliver it more efficiently in a more cost-effective way and at scale through using mobile, through using these technological advances? And that's their whole business, and the question is, are they going to be able to do it?
I think there's another piece to this, though, which nobody talks about, except for maybe me, which is marketing. I think that, we sell these ideas to people about getting themselves healthy, and fundamentally, that is a very abstract value. And if you look at marketing and advertising, I have to pull a quote out. There's this quote from this guy in the makeup business who says, "In our factory we make lipstick, and our advertising we sell hope." And I think that's a really important concept, about how you package these things for people. If you tell people, if you do this, you will be healthier, they go, yeah, okay. If you tell people, if you do this, you will be sexier, they are more interested. And thinking about how you the consumer packaged products companies sell lots of stuff for a reason. They know how to market it to people. They know how to use messaging and storylines on advertising, on TV. You see those things on TV, you go, I want that, because I want to be with Kate Upton, who's sitting next to that thing, right? And I think it's really important for the medical industry to start thinking about that as well. Is how do you package and market to consumers, like you would if you're selling a Coke or Pepsi or a car or whatever, instead of, shouldn't you be taking care of your diabetes and helping us all save money?
Well, let's take obesity. People couldn't even have more social motivation to address that,
Yeah.
right? But it's so hard, right? So,
Well, I don't know, we could take some lessons from healthcare, from the diet industry.
Yeah.
They know how to market their products.
They know how to market the products, and Weight Watchers phenomenally successful, but it doesn't last. It's not a lasting effect, is the problem.
Well, it's a problem for us consumers, but it's not a problem for the industry.
Right. It's all about whose dollar are you talking
That
about?
creates recurring business. I'm going to ask maybe 5 more minutes here. We'll wrap up my questions, and we're going to open it up for the crowd. So load up your questions, and I think there's a microphone back here too that they'll want you to go talk into so they can get it on camera. So David, this one's a softball for you. And I know we haven't gotten to any pharma issues quite yet, so I'll throw you this one. So bringing a new blockbuster drug to market now, the cost is just astronomical, and it's going up dramatically as we speak. So can technology heal pharma?
right. What amazed me to address the first part of that question is was that in both the New Yorker and the New York Times this week suggested that this business about drug development being expensive is bull, and actually it's just evil drug companies, and in fact it's not really that expensive to develop a drug, and people are just being sold more goods. And I was pleased about the new piece, I haven't published it yet, but the piece is, the basic idea is that actually, if only that were true, that the real problem is that drug development is actually as expensive as sort of people think it is, but it's unsustainably so. You can't take, the conservative estimate is $1.3 billion per drug, including the cost of failures, and Matt Herbert's writing about $5–6 billion a drug. And then not like for, post-market surveillance, the phase 4 study, because it's to straightforward to approval. So it's really, really hard. And the dilemma is that it's driven by the fact that our understanding of biology is exceptionally limited. So, I think there are a lot of different ways to sort of our biology is much more complicated than we've really been able to appreciate. To the extent that the new head of Merck's research, basically admitted that he goes, when we ever actually have something that works, it's a bloody miracle. And this is the guy who they hired to solve all the problems. And he's like, man, we're lucky if it ever goes away. And that was honest. So one of the ways you could say that some of these technologies could work, one of the things, for example, with this MGH-MIT Center for Assessment Technology and Continuous Health that Danny Asiello and I are working on, is trying to get to the idea of, I think the future is really moving towards sort of continuous phenotyping. Right now, what you're trying to say, how can you try to, the concept is the right drug for the right patient at the right time. When we think about that now in terms of, certain genetic markers or certain sort of discrete biological markers, you're expressing this marker or you're not, you have this enzyme or that enzyme. But the idea is if you were able to have a behavioral component, you could be able to figure out who exactly you could target your medicine to, do your study, your clinical development would be way cheaper. If right now you have to sometimes study drugs in tons of people because your effect size, John can school me on all this stuff here, but your effect size is so small that you need to study so many people to get significance. But if you were able to cone it down to exactly the right people, not only on the basis of genetics, but also on the basis of behavior, on the basis of other qualities, then that would be one way that the drug development could be more efficient. I think what's another issue is that The other way I think that what drug companies, I don't know whether it's make it cheaper or not, but one of the things they're going to have to do, as to the extent that we are moving to a value-based world, is that drug companies ideally are going to offer not here's a pill, but here's a solution, not something that here's something that you're going to take. But if you're Kaiser, you don't want, you're only going to pay for some medicine if it ultimately reduces cost. If it's going to be, if you're going to take, some new once-a-day drug instead of some generic twice-a-day drug, you want to be sure that your once-a-day drug with the increased cost is actually going to reduce the cost for, Kaiser, if that's what you're paying for, is downstream. So I think that being able to have a something that's sort of more embracing, that's sort of a solution, that's sort of drug plus, where you're able to offer an engagement platform, you're able to offer more tools that are able to connect with the patient and help them be successful at what your medicine is supposedly helping people do. I think that ultimately is going to be, not just sort of a nice to have, but maybe eventually table stakes if you really want to have some new product approved and actually implemented.
Anything else to add there, Lucy? So I'm going to, after this one, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions for you. So did you want them to line up here at the mic?
If they do, they get a book. That's our instinct.
You get a book if you line up at the microphone and ask questions. Oh, here we go. So as I said, I've come back full circle to the beginning. So I want to ask the exact question. I'm going to give Christina Wan, who's in the audience, raise your hand, Christina, props for being my first and only question to come from Twitter after I asked. I obviously don't have any followers. No one.
It's because you only have one Twitter follower.
Exactly. That's destroyed my life. So this is her question. Which areas in digital health have the greatest uptake impact in the near term?
I think the greatest opportunity in the near term in digital health, by impact, I guess it depends on how you define impact, but probably for streamlining operations of provider organizations. So not consumer oriented, but instead helping hospitals or health systems, if you will, share data to deliver care at the bedside more effectively, cheaper and better with fewer mistakes, that type of stuff. We're sharing data to coordinate payment streams when patients are paying cash, part of their HSA, and part of their stuff is covered, and how do you do all that, and tie it back to eligibility and the provider network. So more, I'd say more administrative, operational components at the moment. I mean, I still think we're a ways away from major impact on the clinical side, although it's growing for sure. But I think where are people, and by people I mean people with large quantities of money, motivated to spend right now, it's in operational and cost efficiencies in health systems.
So what I would, the number one thing I would say is I don't think there's going to be one answer, and you shouldn't believe it if I said that, where this is the thing that's hot. I think that, remember when Google first came out, people were like, oh, there's one area that you don't want to be in that's already a commodity, it's search. And then they seem to have done okay, right?
Right.
So, so I think if there's an area that you can have a vision, a path to make a difference and make where the world doesn't have to change completely, like to be completely ACO for you to be successful, but where you're going to make someone's life better. You've identified a legitimate current pain point. And that you've understood it completely. I mean, it's unbelievable how much screwed up incentives there are in the healthcare system where you'd think solving a problem would be helpful, and then doctors, and then hospitals are like, well, thank you, you're going to cost us all this money by making it more efficient. You just have, it's sad, and you have to think about that. Frankly, I think you're still trying to do it. I actually really agree with Lisa that a really important area, the first thing all these hospitals are trying to do is figure out what even data they're sitting on, and how to collect them, how to pull out of the EMR, things like Health Catalyst, to sit on top of EMRs, and sort of where you actually put all the data. But then people are going to figure out, well, how to figure out, well, what do you do with all this data, and how do you crunch it in a way that actually gets into the workflow and makes people's lives better.
So what, yeah.
Yeah, the so what of it. And I think there's going to be a lot of things coming in that space.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and start taking questions here, and I'd like to ask you to be as brief as possible.
Somebody's got, is it Madeline, are you here? Yeah.
They're over by the microphone. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
good. So we can get as many questions in as possible.
Sure. So it's been a really fun session. The question on the table was, can a passionate entrepreneur change the healthcare system? And I think your thesis is a passionate marketing person can change behavior. It's very different. So thanks.
Well, that is a fact.
Yeah. And that's really kind of your main thesis. And then the recent answer was work on making the paperwork go faster. Right? The administrative elements of stuff. So healthcare is a big thing, and a lot of changes going on with Obamacare. Hard to track, what's going to be the winners in there. When you see an entrepreneur, what are you looking for? When do you know that this is a good idea?
Wow, that's such a hard question. But there's a road answer, okay, which I'll give you first, which is, venture capitalists are looking for somebody who knows the space, who portrays confidence and knowledge and expertise, where the idea is clearly solving a problem that is well articulated and that you can verify is a problem that lots of people agree is a problem. They have a unique or unique-ish solution that is not easily copied and can be easily deployed and scaled, that has a revenue model that is reasonable and people will pay for it, and there's demonstration of effect that people will pay for it and keep paying for it, things like that. And that's sort of the road answer, right? The real answer, I think, is that's all true, but a lot of it is really gut feel. I mean, I think for anybody who's an investor to stand up and tell you that there's some science to it is a load of crap. We all invest in things that work, and we all invest in things that don't work, despite all the due diligence that we do and the months of time and research that we take in these things. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. And the secret sauce generally is about the person who's leading the organization, or the few people leading the organization, and their leadership and analytical skills and ability to pivot and change and really see how they need to change their idea to fit. And the other is luck and opportunity, getting to the right place at the right time and finding customers that'll believe. So there's a lot of serendipity involved in a successful company, as well as great thinking and great ideas. So that's a really tough one. And part, I know for me, you think you know it when you see it a lot of times when they come in. You feel like you come in and you go, that one stands out. I'm not exactly sure I can tell you why, but that one stands out. And then you do a bunch of research to justify yourself why you believe that.
And the funny thing is, the statistic, if you look at the Kauffman foundations around VCs, are just shit. I mean, their ability to actually predict this stuff accurately is terrible.
Yeah.
And they're,
it's about as good as my ability to reliably win at craps when I go to Vegas.
It really, but it really is like that. And then plus, there are some advantages just to, when you can make an argument that people could not quite choose entirely randomly, but if you're at one of these big firms, you're able to make some stuff happen.
For sure.
So it's, it's sort of, the observer.
It's making your own luck, that stuff, yeah.
Yeah, so the idea that there are these seers who identify talent, I think that's what they like to cultivate. I mean, it's again, if you read a new piece of Wired, it's much more like they have a lot of small bets and you just need one or two to win to do okay. And by the way, most of the firms haven't been crushed, these VC firms haven't been crushing it, haven't been tapping into the carry, haven't been doing so great at all. And it's just like this whole kind of aura out there. I mean, they've been living off the management fees, not because that they've actually made so much beyond it.
I mean, there's certainly some firms and some individuals in firms who've done remarkably well. And I think, it's the ability to...
Fenton is doing very well.
I'm sorry?
Peter Fenton.
Yeah, Brian Roberts.
Yes.
But it's the truth is it's a lot of hard work even after you make the investment, especially after you make the investment. It's 3 or 4 months up front, and then it's 7 years of grinding, hands-on support of those companies if you're good at what you do.
Great answer, thanks.
Who's next?
I'm wondering what the ethical boundaries you guys see developing from all this and how the government's moving to address those, plus what the FDA is doing in this sphere when it comes to medical devices and mobile apps for healthcare.
The ethical boundaries?
Yeah, there are. I'm just looking at stuff on the cloud and all kinds of stuff. I'm like, whoa, this yeah.
I was listening to a talk yesterday. I teach a class at Berkeley in the business school, about the changing healthcare economy. And I had somebody in there yesterday talking about some of the new applications she's seeing being considered by companies. For instance, an application that scrapes your Facebook and social media information about where you are, and scrapes your credit card information to see that you've been buying lots of alcohol, and says, you know, can predict that this one's, you know, going to be an alcoholic and probably needs an intervention. I mean, things like that. Wow, you know, that's hardcore. Or tells your parents, you know, that, you know, the credit card's being tapped for lots of beer and party pictures at school, you know. So I don't think anybody's doing anything around those ethical boundaries, to be honest. And I don't think most people care that much. And there's all this talk about privacy and HIPAA and, you know, all this hand waving about it. And I don't think that the majority of the human beings care that much about their privacy, because they put their stuff out on Twitter, on Facebook, and on wherever for people to see. And it's, everybody knows, you know, that when you write an email, Google's reading it, so you get keywords and all that. We all know that. Forget the NSA, Google's the enemy, right? So I don't know. I don't think the government's doing that much about it, and I don't think. I mean, I think the thing that they need to think about is more like security from your, you know, stealing your identity and things like that. But
that's what the hackers want. They want your identity because they don't particularly want your health information out.
Yeah, but I think the ethical issues are beyond that. I mean, so.
I think that it's really sensitive, a lot of this health information, and I think people do care about it. I think they really do, you know, patients they should worry about it. I think that, you know, I mean, you're, on the one hand, people say, oh, the young kids nowadays, they overshare. But on the other hand, you know, not everybody puts up, oh yeah, well, you know, being treated for depression or being, you know, I think that there are various gradations, and I think people are appropriately protective, and I think that, you know, they're, you know, I mean, you know, if you look at Facebook, everyone's living happy, glorious lives, and, you know, the reality is more complex. And then I think people really do, you know, exercise discretion. Many people exercise discretion in what they're sharing. I think if you look at Sandy Penton, he's actually developed this whole thing, and I can't do justice to, but where he acknowledges the need to have a framework for, you know, where you own your data, where people, if people are going to take them, you know, you give people permission to use it for a kind of, you know, in a particular context. But I actually agree that that's an incredibly important issue that is going to become increasingly, if you think about it, as people, you know, you even think out with your iPhone, you know, you want to know where, everyone track where you're going, you want some company to know all this stuff. So I think that's an appropriate concern to raise. I think what Lisa's saying is right that people are just beginning to wrestle with it. But I don't think people feel cavalier about it. I think as people recognize it, and in particular in the context of health, I think there is a real concern.
We finally have what we disagree about.
But I'd say don't let that get in the way of innovation. We had a talk a week or two ago, and Greg Lucier, the former CEO of Life Technologies here, put it best. It's table stakes. You know, if you're going to be managing personal health information, you're going to have to deal with HIPAA. If you're making a drug or you're building a medical device, you're going to have to deal with the FDA. Learn it. Spend a few bucks, unfortunately, dealing with it. But if you have a great innovation, you're going to overcome all that.
John.
I spent $100,000 going to business school. And I came away with one lesson, and that is I had an econ professor who looked at us every day and opened up class by saying, if you want to understand behavior, look at incentives.
Look at what?
Incentives.
Right.
And so a couple of years back, I noticed my doctor started calling me to remind me of my appointment the day before the appointment, because they finally figured out that they came out ahead, even though they really shouldn't have to do that. And so I guess the question I'm asking is the physician is really in the center of the whole process, whether it's running a hospital. My father was chief of surgery at a hospital in Florida many years ago, or just the day-to-day care. And so my question is really kind of directed to David, which is, what do physicians want? That's a very broad question, but I think it drives the whole issue.
Chris?
Well, I mean, I think the conversation gets, I think one of the challenging parts about that is the idea that there's this sort of simple, it's one of those sort of, different parts of the elephant where some people are like, oh, it's one of those things where it's complex and you can get screwed if you neglect any of those parts. Because we're like, oh, if some people say, oh my gosh, doctors in particular, we're this wonderful thing and we're driven by, altruism. And the funny thing is, there really is a component of that. And yet, people are going to dermatology. You can look at what specialties people go into, and it's, what you get paid for the different specialties plays a big role. But on the other hand, if you just have the view that doctors are these, purely people driven by financial incentives, I think you're missing a lot of what motivates many physicians. And if you would try to drive their behavior or improve how they're acting, saying, oh, well, we're going to pay you more to do the right thing, I'm not sure that would necessarily be the way to do it. I think, so I think being able to, one of my favorite, is sort of example, Doximity, which is sort of this doctor network, and because they're the folks who used to do Hippocrates, and I feel like they seem to have a particularly good feel for the complexity of physicians and realizing that the range of motivations that they have, and to sort of try to speak to some of those different motivations at the same time. Where doctors may want a better job, but they also want to know what's happening in the world. They may want to know what their colleagues are doing, both collaboratively and competitively, and all of those things are happening at once. So I'm more worried about an overly simplistic view that's like, oh, the answer is you're unsatisfied.
Can you create a system that is more flexible, allows them, in a way that management does in an organization to move in the direction to get what they want? Because for me,
well, so some of these direct primary cares, for example, are really trying to do that. Rishika, Rishika, for Napoli, they're trying, I mean, part of it has to do with ways for reimbursement. So he's somebody who has something called Eora Health, right? Where they basically idea that he kind of, only some kind of like high-risk populations, so it's like casino workers, and then they'll sort of own the risk, but then they're by providing very good quality of care, they actually keep down the cost, and then they keep some of what they make. So that's somewhere, that's an organization, ChenMed would be another example, where physicians in an appropriate structure are able to practice the type of medicine that they want to, feel like they're being better physicians for their patients, and take home a little bit more as a consequence of that. So when you can get those incentives, both financial and emotional, humanistic, aligned, I think those are your best chances for success.
I trust that you're familiar with IBM's development of Watson, the Jeopardy playing computer. I understand that the first, call it a real-world application of that technology, is going to be to develop an expert diagnostic and treatment decision system.
For cancer.
Do you think that's going to work? And if not, do you think the technology, that the failure will be due to technologic failure, social failure in the sense of the trust issue that you talked about, or a regulatory issue?
Well, I mean, my belief is I think it'll be very, very helpful, but not the answer all unto itself. It's sort of the same back to the beginning of technology plus humans. The research shows it takes something like, it depends on who you ask, between 7 and 17 years for a best practice discovery in medicine to get from the Journal of American Medicine into the heads of most doctors. There's just too much to know out there, so that doctors can't know it all, and they certainly can't recall it at will every time in context in a way that Watson probably can. So that can bring to bear more algorithms, more thoughts, more possibilities in a decision tree in a way no human could possibly do. But there's always context, right, in every situation. And you oftentimes find that the context really, really matters. And so I think applying Watson to inform doctors in the process of diagnosing patients would be incredibly valuable. But using it to get a kiosk with Watson and we kill all the doctors, I don't think that would necessarily be a good thing. I don't know. You can kill all the doctors for other reasons, but for that one, I don't think it would be a good thing.
You want to get rid of that death.
So yeah, I think it would be very helpful though, because I mean those decision support tools are valuable in every other industry. Why wouldn't they be in this one?
So I think it's going to, I completely agree with Lisa. I think it's going to be an example where the technology under-delivers short-term, and then maybe it exceeds our expectations in the long run. We're able to, an additional area where I think that type of thing is going to be helpful is also informing even researchers where to look, where are some of the interesting questions. You know, even when you're saying whether it's going to help pharma, how it's going to help companies, I think that there's, if you're eventually able to use some of these more expanded measurements to get better understanding of physiology, get a better understanding of sort of the real-time way the body works, and be able to sort of use it to drive some underlying studies of biology and make some more connections and figure out what the target or what are the nodes of the network, or what even more systematically, you know, what behavior interventions are going to be the most useful. I think that being able to look at information holistically and collectively, and also be able to define where are your holes, where are some gaps, where are some opportunities that you might not have gathered. I'm optimistic about that in the long run, but the idea that the thing is like reading all these crap journals and then distilling some information from it, particularly considered, you know, I'm less optimistic that that's going to somehow I wish there was going to be some magical answer because there's some horrible diseases out there and we really know what we can get. I'm not sure that Watson is going to, you know, as it's currently situated, going to provide.
Well, I mean, of course, we'll still be limited by the fact that we still don't know everything about biology and the human body and the like. So it's got to continue to be learning all the time. And still, I think, just like I said about VCs, I think doctors also have intuition, you know, and use judgment and experience that's more human. That's important. You know, it may not be important in every second. It's not going to be important to diagnose an ear infection, but it's important to diagnose, you know, some weird cancer in the tumor that is different, you know, aspects in the same tumor.
I mean, not addressing the Watson thing, but like one of the things, you know, people come into the office and they may be asking about their earache or whatever it is, but they may really like be having some other concern on their mind. And a lot of what physicians do is sort of minister to that, I would say. And so that's an important thing.
You must have looked at the Cleveland Clinic example of how they manage such good outcomes in their healthcare system.
I'm familiar with the Cleveland Clinic. Is there a particular question?
Yes, the question is, obviously, I mean, you do agree that they've had better outcomes at a lower cost?
No, I don't agree with that necessarily. I mean, I'm sure there's some instances where they've had good outcome at lower cost. And like Kaiser, they're a staff model, which tends to have some advantages with respect to controlling the delivery of care and controlling costs. But I don't think the Cleveland Clinic has done anything particularly.
What I would say, what this is bringing up for me, which I hope addresses your question, is that sort of the dilemma is, you know, people talk about is some of these big hospitals, you know, for providing primary care, they actually overcharge for all this stuff where they're really good at these, you know, incredibly complex procedures that only they can do, or that they specialize in. So, for example, the Cleveland Clinic turns, you know, Toby Cosgrove, excellent heart care, to the extent that I think it's really exciting that some of these big corporations have basically contracted with them, so that if you or a member of your family, someone who's covered, needs a, you know, God forbid, a heart transplant or some major procedure, boom, they go there. Similarly, there's a in Washington State, the what's it called, back center. There's a back center. I'm blanking on it, in Washington State, where they really specialize, and people contract with them. So if there's some back issue that you have as an employer, you've contracted with them, and actually they provide, because that's not all they do, but they're so specialized in that, you're going to get better care for your back issue there, or better care for your heart issue, and it actually is more efficient for Walmart, whoever does this, to fly you out and your family to the Cleveland Clinic and get care there than to get some sort of half-assed care from someone who does one operation a year at your local hospital.
But I think that's the key. Is it's usually in very, very particular areas where there's been demonstrated. Like if you go to Kaiser, Northern California, they have a much lower rate of sepsis than a lot of other hospitals. So that's a good thing. So, you know, different places have demonstrated.
And even internally, Kaiser, just like you're saying, is trying to do that. They're trying to, you know, talk about, you know, along the board, but he's saying we're trying to have one place where we do, and not have like 5 different neurosurgeons, have one neurosurgeon, you know, that does this type of procedure here, or one cardiac, you know, so yeah, to try to make it more efficient.
So my question is, have you looked at how technology could help replicate such care in other parts of the country in different hospitals? Because so Cleveland Clinic is good for heart and nothing else. But
That wasn't what we said.
I mean, that doesn't.
No, but you're saying a second. I mean, so I think if I'm
But
hearing
if
it right,
they've got a really good heart program, then maybe.
okay, so what you're talking about is replicating best practices.
Yes.
What I would say is an example of this occurring in practice are cancer pathways. So this is an example where top places like MD Anderson, I think Barbara's trying to do this, they try to identify what they see as being the best pathway for both medical and for cost effectiveness, for various diseases, and to try to say, okay, let us try to now, in a sense, sell this, but offer this as this is how people with this particular condition should be treated. There's a wonderful piece that Atul Gawande wrote about this in the case of cystic fibrosis, where the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation is actually trying to do this, is trying to say, look, one of the nice things you can do when you start to measure things is compare outcomes and say, well, who is doing this something the best? Hospitals are trying to do this internally to see which people are doing it best, and not just by gaming the system, which unfortunately happens a lot. And say, well, who's getting the best outcomes, and what can we learn from their processes to figure out what are they doing right here so that we can replicate this. I think there's a huge, that's hopefully one of the areas of the technology we're talking about, this sort of this data analysis.
Well, I think there's a concrete example, for instance, is telemedicine, the application of telemedicine for mentoring or proctoring cases that are remotely held. So for instance, I saw this company recently called Pristine. Pristine is a Google Glass company. Yeah, like Google Glass, don't like Google Glass, whatever, it's not important. What their idea is that a surgeon who might be less experienced could be looking at a patient in a case in an operating room and have some other guy from, let's call it the Cleveland Clinic or wherever the expert may be, advising in the performance of that surgical procedure. So there's ways of transporting people and knowledge through telemedicine in a way that, to rural communities, to all kinds of places, in a way that hasn't been done traditionally for both financial payment reasons and for regulatory reasons, practicing across state lines is illegal, for instance, and things like that. But the opportunity to use technology to do those things is profound.
So an example of a company that's trying to do that, if you spoke in your class, Jeff Clapp with Better, partnered with the Mayo Clinic to try to bring some of the Mayo expertise to bear on people's individual health problems. But again, the issue, coming back to regulation, is it's a real bear, because the incumbents, if you're a local doctor, you want to keep your patients. You don't want them going to getting their care, getting advice from the Mayo Clinic instead of from you. And you could argue that, if you wouldn't want all your local doctors, you wouldn't still have local doctors. So there's a real tension between them.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Harry. We're going to probably make this one our last question. So go for it.
Make it a good one.
Okay, so simple question. There's a saying in medicine: if you don't have the right diagnosis, you can't find the cure. So I'm looking at the title, and very nice presentation, very nice discussion. It's covered a lot of ground. Can you go through the top 2 or 3 things, like what is the problem that we're trying to solve? What is the diagnosis when we are trying to heal healthcare?
Small question. I mean, certainly the biggest challenge, I think, that underlies all the other stuff is the misaligned incentives, clinical and financial. I was talking to a company today that was explaining how they reduce the number of hospital days and admissions for a particular set of things. And I said, well, that's great in a hospital that is at financial risk and fully capitated for its patients. But for a hospital that's getting paid mostly DRGs and case rates, that's terrible. You just took away their revenue. What they want is everybody to get admitted, but only stay a short time. So what they need is an app that helps everybody get admitted, whether they need to or not, but only stay a short time. And I think that is obviously screwed up, right? And for the patient, so much of the incentive has been basically you get free or cheap care from insurance. You're indifferent to what you get because you don't even know what it costs or whether it's good or bad or whatever. And the payers have been largely focused on figuring out how to keep people, from getting anything, so they don't have to pay for it because they get paid a fixed amount of money anyway. So, kind of figuring out how to align all those financial incentives and the clinical incentives that go along with them, I think is the #1 problem that needs to get solved, because it unleashes the opportunity to solve all the rest, like freeing the data and using it for good, not evil, and all the rest of that stuff. But that one to me is the underlying disaster for healthcare in our system.
On the patient/consumer side as well. I think it's all about incentive.
So I absolutely agree about that. The incentives are totally, are severely misaligned. But if you were to answer the question that, part of the question that you were asking, well, what's the sort of diagnosis? I think that it's expanding our concept of medicine and health, and the idea is essentially blasting out of the doctor's office and having it be more encompassing, so that it encompasses the patient in the entirety of their life, and then it also enables them to be more actively involved in communities of other patients, in relationship with providers, in sort of, not by level, I don't mean to say level of playing field, though I do mean that, but it shouldn't even be like that, just more opportunities for collaborating, for interaction, for developing, for really getting, I have an optimistic view of this, to be honest with you, using some of these technologies to understand human physiology better, to understand how people respond better, to be able to help people help themselves better. I think a lot of these technologies can help so many of the different kind of stuck points in medicine and in health, and really kind of make our, make health and human conditions so much better.
Somebody said yesterday in a meeting I was in that, we spend all this time talking about medical homes right now, right? But why isn't the medical home the home? Where you learn to take good care of yourself so you don't have all these problems. It's an interesting point.
And it's an industry that abhors change, and in a lot of ways for very good reasons, but in a lot of ways not so much so. Just it's more because it's always been done that way. So there again is a challenge to the innovation community, is push those boundaries.
Can I answer a very, very quick question?
Okay.
30 seconds. And in the era of next generation of gene sequencing and the technology, and as we do DX/RX to reduce the clinical trial number and the more target therapy, and I wonder what your thoughts in this line, DX/RX, what technology may impact?
Right. So sort of the question is where, how is, more broadly, it's how is sort of genomic data going to sort of impact? I mean, sort of picking them from behavior. If you sort of say, okay, well, what's your chance? I mean, like this. So, what's your chance of developing a heart attack? There's sort of like a way you calculate the score, and it's like you can, if you have, what's your chance of developing a heart attack? Having a heart attack within 10 years, and it's sort of like a C index, something like that. And you can calculate it with like 0.787 accuracy. And if you use all the genetic information, you can get up to 0.788. So, and that's not true for everything. Obviously, for things like for some breast cancer, for a lot of different conditions, it's really impactful. But I think we're going to have to figure out where to date, one of the dilemmas has been that the genomics, even if you have the sequence information available, hasn't been as dispositive, as positive as one might have liked in all the circumstances. And I think that figuring out what are the instances where it's really going to be helpful, and what are the instances where maybe it's not. I'll just pick another specific example. There's a thought that many people are on blood thinner, Coumadin, and warfarin. Medicare, right? Did this experiment where it's like, okay, we're going to figure if you can metabolize it fast or slow. The government's going to pay for this study where you're going to figure, if we could figure it out whether you're a fast or slow metabolizer, we can get you up to dose faster, save money. Turned out, didn't make a difference. Didn't save a drop of money because every doctor can tell you, how do you start with warfarin? You go low and you go slow, and there are many factors. So how much of the specific genetics is determining somebody's overall clinical conditions? It may be small, in many cases, maybe a smaller part than we realize. But it also may be that we need to figure out the interactions better. I mean, usually, one of my buddies, Eric Schadt, and so I follow his work particularly closely. And I think what he is doing with some of the data people, this Jeff Hemmelbacher used formerly from Facebook, what they're putting together Mount Sinai. I'm excited that the overall approach may figure out how to blend networks and data, networks and genomics, and try to figure that out. But do I think that like the next bit of sequencing by itself is going to be the answer. I'm not sure. I think that can be a representative important part of the puzzle.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, thank you very much to our speakers.
Lisa, David, Rick, thank you so much. We've got little presents for you, but I also have one announcement to make before you leave. Our next monthly event is going to take place on May 27th. And it's about taking a company public. And what we've tried to do is we've tried to create a panel of an entrepreneur who's done it before, a lawyer who's done it, that's Hayden, an accountant who's done it before, and an investment banker. So from all sides, we'll examine, when is it right to take a company public, what's involved in the S1 document, and you learn a lot more from Hayden and everyone else. And when does it make sense for a company to go public? So that's May 27th. I also forgot to thank our sponsors, especially since Rick is over here. I'm going to make a show and say that Qualcomm is one of our sponsors.
Right.
We've got their board to your left, Rick. To your left.
Okay.
And then we have Gary Rayner, who's one of our sponsors. And Gary's another entrepreneur, a story of an entrepreneur. Within 4 years, he started with a sheet of paper, and then he sold his company for $300 million. Right? So, just a fabulous, fabulous story. He's come and spoken to us before, and we're very grateful for. He's actually a platinum sponsor, one level higher than Qualcomm.
We have a few more sponsorships indeed.
Well, thank you all for coming. And let me just give, this book is written actually by a chartered.
Oh, thank you so much.
I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you very much.